This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it's Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. In today's video, I'm looking at creatures that have star as their stat line. This type of stat line indicates that the power and toughness of a creature is variable, and it changes based on things that are going on in the game. For example, Sarah Avatar has power and toughness, each equal to your life total, and as your life total changes throughout the game, so too do her power and toughness. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have a star for both power and toughness, or it had to make a creature token with the star stat line. Cards that have one or both of their stats equal to star plus another numeral are eligible as well. Star stat lines are not the most common. In the 25 plus years Magic has existed, only 122 cards were eligible for this list. And in this video, we'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, or Legacy, or Vintage Championship top 8 is worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest top 8 is worth 1 point. At number 10, it is the original lurgoif. I say original because 7 additional ones have been printed since this guy debuted in Ice Age. All lurgoifs have star stat lines, so you should probably expect to see at least a couple more as we move up this list. In the case of this lurgoif, his power is equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, and his toughness is equal to that number plus 1. Lurgoif was commonly played in aggro decks between 1995 and 1997. It had at least one top 8 at Magic's first 3 World Championships. Creature-heavy decks were fairly common in these early days, so Lurgoif often gave you a pretty good return on your mana investment. It was a particularly nice thing to have in your hand as insurance against a board sweeper, because if you or your opponent managed to wipe everything out, Lurgoif was going to be extra big. Lurgoif doesn't have any points since 1997, but it did introduce an enduring creature type, and one that is all about having the star stat line. At number 9, it is Geist Honored Monk, whose stats are equal to the number of creatures you control. 5 mana for that stat line is a bit steep, so it's a good thing that he makes sure to bring some friends along. 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying come with him, so at worst it'll give you a 3/3 with vigilance and 2 1/1 flyers, which isn't so bad for 5 mana. In Standard, the Monk was played in traditional aggro decks, but also in tribal human decks as well as in Birthing Pod. The Geist was nice to search up with the pod if you needed extra bodies to get to your next turn, and it was also nice to sacrifice to Birthing Pod because it would leave behind the spirit tokens while allowing you to search up a powerful 6 mana creature like Inferno Titan or Wormcoil Engine. Geist Honored Monk has never gained any points outside of block and Standard. At number 8, it is Beanstalk Giant, the only card on this list that's still in Standard. The Giant's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control, which, since he costs 7 mana, will usually mean he's at least a 7/7. However, if that's all the Giant was, it's unlikely people would play him. He would just be a big creature who dies to lots of stuff. However, by adding an adventure, you get a card that is very nice. Fertile Footsteps can be cast while the Giant is in your hand, and it allows you to both ramp and fix your mana. Then the Giant is moved to exile, and you can cast him from there. This means the Giant gives you 2 cards of value, and it also means that you will be able to play the Giant himself a turn sooner. The Giant gets even better in decks that are built around adventures and run payoffs like Lucky Clover and Edgewall Innkeeper. Adventure decks haven't been making much noise in Standard of late, but the Giant could definitely gain some more points before it rotates. At number 7, it is detritivore, which is our second lurgoif. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of non-basic lands in opposing graveyards. That might sound a little too specific, but most decks in most formats play lots of non-basic lands, so if you can find a way to get them in the graveyard, detritivore can potentially be quite large. And the good news is, detritivore can take care of that all on his own, since when he's suspended, he will destroy a non-basic land every single time a time counter is removed. This means that detritivore can both interfere with your opponent's mana base and potentially come down as a large creature. Detritivore gained most of its points in Time Spiral Block Constructed, but it also had 1 point in Standard, which came in a red-green ramp deck. At number 6, it is Eon Chronicler, whose power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand. It's part of the same cycle as detritivore. Like detritivore, the Chronicler does stuff for you while it is suspended, essentially drawing you an extra card every turn while it's suspended. It was featured pretty heavily in block and standard control decks, which could use the Chronicler both as a source of card advantage and a potential win condition in the late game. At number 5, we have a Johnny Goldman who can make a creature token with a star stat line, one that actually references Sarah Avatar because its power and toughness are also each equal to your life total. This is the very first Ajani, and it was printed in the very first set to have planeswalkers, Lorwyn. Like many other Ajanis, he has an ability that gains him life and another one that makes your creatures better. The Avatar token he can make with his ultimate works well with life gain since the creature has power and toughness equal to your life total. He saw play in a lot of aggressive white decks while in Standard, especially in Kithkin and black-white token decks. He was also featured in Lorwyn block-constructed Kithkin decks. At number 4, it is Master of Ethereum, whose power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts you control. The Master itself is an artifact too, but the artifact synergy doesn't end there. It also gives +1/+1 to all of your artifact creatures. It did not gain any points in block or standard. There just weren't enough artifact decks around that wanted it, but it has been played a ton in Modern. In both Extended and Modern, it has been featured in Affinity decks, artifact-based aggro decks, so you can certainly see how the Master fits in well there. At number 3, it is Packrat, whose power and toughness are each equal to the number of rats you control. That would not be a particularly good card, but luckily, the rat also comes with an incredible activated ability. It lets you pay 2 and a black and discard a card to make a copy of him. Now, obviously, all the copies of Packrat are rats, and they also have this text box. This means that as soon as you start making copies of Packrat, it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to get things under control with any removal that is not a board sweeper. Things just snowball out of control in a hurry, and oftentimes if you have a rat in play, it's just better to keep making copies of it until your opponent either dies or plays a board sweeper, because that way you aren't committing any other resources to the board. Things get even sillier if you are getting extra value out of putting cards in your graveyard. Packrat was a pretty dominant card in Standard. It saw the most play in Devotion to Black decks. Because Packrat makes copies of itself, each copy would actually contribute to your Devotion, making your Devotion payoffs even better. However, the rats were also played in Blue-Black and Orzhov control decks. The rats stayed idle for several years, but the creation of the Pioneer format has been good for the rats, who've started to gain points in Magic's newest format. It was played as a sideboard card in Dimir Inverter decks. Because that was a combo deck, it needed to have a sideboard plan for opponents who can disrupt the combo too easily, and Packrat is exactly that. Dimir Inverter is of course banned now in Pioneer, but it's likely Packrat is still able to find a home in that format. At number 2, it is Voice of Resurgence, which makes a star creature token when it dies, or when your opponent casts a spell on your turn. This token's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control, so that's no joke. The voice just brings impressive efficiency to the table while harshly punishing opponents who try to disrupt you during your own turn. Basically, it's quite difficult to ever trade 1-for-1 with Voice of Resurgence. It has been played primarily in aggro decks in Block, Standard, and Modern. The voice has had a bit of a resurgence lately as a result of the Pioneer format being created. It's been played in both Heliod Life and Niv Mizzet Reborn decks in the format, and it seems likely to continue to gain points there. And at number 1, probably not surprising anybody, it's Tarmogoyf, which has 264 more points than Voice of Resurgence. The third and final lurgoif to make the list, Tarmogoyf has power equal to the number of card types in all graveyards, and toughness equal to that number +1. Tarmogoyf doesn't do anything flashy. He doesn't have an Into the Battlefield ability or any sort of static ability that impacts the board. He's just a huge 2-drop on many board states. In decks that can quickly put things in the graveyard, it isn't unusual for the Goyf to be a 4-5 or so on turn 2. That's not an easy thing to deal with, even in non-rotating formats. Tarmogoyf is considered one of the best 2-drops ever, and it's all based on just being a super efficient vanilla creature. Tarmogoyf has gained points in every format it is possible to gain points in, seeing play in pretty much any deck with green in it, but he tends to really flourish in decks with graveyard themes or sub-themes for obvious reasons. Tarmogoyf has a firm hold at the number 1 spot on this list, he has a huge lead, and he's still being played at a higher rate than any of the other cards on this list. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the almost 300 of these I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.